Hello, g'day, and welcome to our Summer Hits series. Thanks so much for tuning into the show in 2024. If you're new here, a big welcome to you. And to all our listeners, I'm very grateful for you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, connecting with the content, and making this podcast a part of your year's journey. Our Summer Hits features the top episodes of 2024, the ones that really struck a chord with you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. This is number 1, the most popular episode of the year. We're here to win, win, win. I'm very excited about our topic today. I'm talking with Pastor Andrew Hogarth from Journey Church in South Australia. And we're talking about a church's journey to evangelism, or really his church's journey to evangelism and becoming more evangelistic. So welcome to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Tina. It's wonderful to be here.
It is fabulous to have you along. 20 years of leading a church is a wonderful accomplishment. So thank you for being faithful to that. Talking about evangelism, give me a picture of how the church was when you started leading 20 years ago, and how would you describe it today? And then we can unpack that journey, basically. So how was it back then for you?
Our church has always been a great church. It was planted in 1987. 21 people joined hands in a lounge room in a versioning kind of new development, led by a really, in my view, probably one of the best church planters of his generation. So high evangelism, high faith, high generosity, all that, and really grew quickly. And then I reckon probably 10 years in, 13 years in, it had some trauma, and I think people started to look a bit inward. Well, that's what the elders told me. He had moved on to plant other churches and that sort of thing, but they'd had some trauma, and I think when that happens, a church can go a bit inward. So at risk was the evangelism temperature, and that's what we found. Our research with the National Christian Life Survey of key evangelism questions showed that, really 1 in 10 people at our church in 2005 felt confident to bring friends to church. Well, 1 in 10, boy, So that was a red flag. And so myself and the other pastors, really took that to heart and thought, okay, what have we got to do? And, you move that to now. We're certainly not perfect by any stretch, but I would say probably 9 out of 10 people would anecdotally now say they feel very confident and are proactive to bring friends to church, which isn't the only measure of evangelism, but in terms of people that they're close with and developing friendships with. And, for some people that's years and years before someone's ready, but they feel confident to bring friends to church, particularly people with no church background. So it's been a great story, a real story of God's grace. Yeah, but that's where we're at today.
That's an incredible difference there of what you've described. And I agree with you. It's definitely, that's not all that we want to talk about in evangelism in terms of people just in our congregations bringing people to church. But let's have that discussion since you've raised it. If you've got you're thinking around 9 or 10 people that are confident to bring people to church. I've heard pastors still giving me stories of we have very low numbers of people being confident. So it begs the question, why are they so confident to bring people to church, and what's going on in your church services or events, so to speak, to give them that confidence? What does it look like?
Yeah. I mean, we're contemporary in style. That was a big shift. We realised that for some people listening, this may sound like a classic kind of church growth thing, the 70s and 80s church growth stuff, or the seeker-friendly service. And it was informed by them, but we've sort of just moved with each, trying to get the best out of those key movements. So I was really moved by a book by Andy Stanley called Deepen, which was part of his journey in a very different context, Alabama, USA, very different. But he said, it was about having a spiritual experience of worship and the word and fellowship that was deep enough for existing Christians, but also wide enough so that people could plug in who weren't otherwise engaged. And I guess there's lots of other ways of doing it, but, and Jesus was the master, wasn't he, of that. And so, but practically we had to pray through and go, okay, there needs to be a consistency. If we don't have Christians feeling confident, and these were good people, so we had to really rethink about what Sunday worship really was and how we did that, and the consistency with that. And we weren't flush with massive amounts of money or anything. We were contemporary, but it was looking at, I guess, just having that outward focus to go, if our people don't have confidence, so what does that mean? Well, everything from, well, is that person's gift really drumming? Because when they drum, it's a train wreck. So those sort of things. So that lends itself to, people's gifts in the right places, the right time, and right through to that experience where I think a lot of churches think about what might be happening in the preaching, which is important, but we were starting to think, well, what's happening in the car park? What's happening on the website? What's the story that people have to bring print? So thinking through practically those sort of things and what that looked like and looking at it through a new person's eyes, that made a big difference. And that conversation started to make a big difference.
Yeah, and what a great little assessment that we could all do, if we're leading churches or on teams of churches, to start asking those questions, or just honestly asking someone in a congregation, how confident are you, to bring someone listening to what they say and then doing some work on that. So tell me about the shift, though, to actually moving in that direction. What were some of the learnings that you got out of that, thinking through how people responded to this shift that you were going to move and drive more this way? In hindsight, were there challenges? What did you learn, etc.?
Oh, well, I learned a lot about myself. I mean, it was, in management terms, it's change management. Now, different personalities deal with that differently. So I learned a lot about myself. There's a lot of things I would have done differently. Some things I tried to move too fast on. And some relationships I needed to build more before bringing change. And so it took time. This was a 7-year, 8-year journey to really bringing that change, because the natural inclination of believers is to become less and less evangelistic. If left to ourselves, it's just human nature. We become more content, more focused on fellowship than evangelism and all those sort of things. And I remember looking at our foyer space, and I looked out after the service. I saw these circles of people talking, and I thought, that's not good. These are people that they all know. And if someone new came, I felt the anxiety as a pastor and, okay, we've got to reach them or whatever. So we had to talk about being a 45-degree person. So 45 degrees is on an angle. So, yeah, we're meeting with friends and people we know, but we're also open at a 45-degree angle to new people and inviting new people and making that a priority. So it wasn't sort of jolting the whole thing, because we had seen, I think, examples of ministries or missions or even churches where it almost becomes evangelism or bust sort of thing. Well, no. It's evangelism and fellowship and worship and discipleship and all those things. So, and people need that sense of connection. So it had to, it's a vital part. It's a front foot, but there's also a back foot with it. So it's sort of bringing change without blowing everything up or getting angry or accusing people, or, it was learning to believe the best about people and existing Christians, and finding the ones that probably had a strong, either by personality and spiritual gifting, the range of gifts and orientation that's probably that bit more outward orientated. Not everyone's like that, but to really find those people and help them give leadership in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. And I do appreciate your wisdom and your grace in, in how you're articulating that process, because I think that all of us can become really keen for our churches to move that way, and then we don't allow the 7 or 8 year process. We want it all overnight.
Yeah.
But
That's right.
very good comments. I know, Andrew, for you as the senior minister, that it's very important that you lead by example in your own life of reaching out. Now, that's not so easily done, is it? As a minister, when you're busy, you can become so focused on everything you're doing. So how do you outwork this value of evangelism in your own personal life where you live? How does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, look, certainly at the time, our kids were sort of in that primary, secondary school aspect, and the school we chose to go to was a bit different to some of the school that others had chosen to go to, and that's not wrong or right, but it was a church school, but probably the major client, 90% of the clientele wouldn't have been Christians. We had to weigh that up, and that's a personal decision for your children and that, but we weighed it up. I think if our kids had been of different personality or maybe a bit more introverted or sensitive, we would have made adjusted that decision for different kids. But for us, it put us in a situation where we had a lot of contact with non-Christian families and friends and through our kids. So I found myself coaching sports I'd never played, and I'm not a great sportsman, but it was about the community and building, particularly with some of the dads, so instead of being the coach, I built a coaching team, and so we became friends and working together, and sharing the common ground. We loved our kids and just wanted to see them, have fun and this sort of stuff. So it was those sort of things, and because it was a church school, I had opportunity. They asked me as a pastor. I was involved with a few pastoral situations as well, but it was really with a lot of non-Christians. And so that was a great opportunity. And that's a bit different now. Our kids are in their 20s, but we've now got a lot of contact with their friends and the families. So now that shifts differently. Well, I think as our kids have got older, I've had to be much more intentional. And so because I've been in the area a long time, I've developed good relationships with a lot of the community leaders, whether that's people on the local regional council or local members of parliament and that sort of thing, and just building up those relationships and family. I've got family members who don't know the Lord, and so we're just building relationships, and most of that is a long, slow burn.
It sure is. But I think that intentionality, what you're saying, that is the key for all of us, and wherever we find ourselves, leading a church or in our workplace, a university or our school. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Thank you for your feedback on how the podcast has been able to help you and your church be more effective in evangelism. In 2025, I'm really looking forward to helping more churches train and equip their congregations for evangelism. Please contact me if I can help support your church. Let's talk beyond the church services, Andrew. So you've really been on this amazing, almost 20-year journey of moving this church to be more and more evangelistic, or really that is the heartbeat of the church. If people go to the website journeyyouc.com, you can see straight away that the whole church is geared that way. So how does this look beyond services, Andrew? Like how is the church? How are you encouraging people to live out their faith in every day, the 6 days a week where they're not at church?
Yeah. Well, with our elders' approval when I first came, we ended up being a church with less midweek meetings than more. We needed to shift even the structure of how we do things. Maybe sometimes I think maybe we've done it to a fault, but to release people so that, people who are that teacher or that engineer, or they're working for the local council or whatever, they've got time, because time has shifted. My father's generation in the 70s and 80s had 25 hours discretionary time a week. This generation have 4. So that's a big shift. The other thing is my father's generation, 70% of women weren't working out of the home. Now 70% of women are working outside of the home as well. By necessity, 1 in 4 parents of children under 5 are both working full time. Now, I'm not making a judgment call on that. I'm saying that's just the way it is. So we tried to predict into the future and jump onto that to say, okay, we've got to help our people see church and their family life and their vocation. You know, most people, a lot of their friends and that come from their workplace, or they might play basketball once a week, you know. But apart from that, they don't have a lot of discretionary time. So, and that's our area, you know, the northeast of Adelaide is professional tradespeople, small business people, you know, busy people. And so it was trying to help them see to maximise that. And there's a risk with that, because I think there's some people have gone, oh, gee, I'd love to have them on that the church council with their gifts. But at what risk? You know, that would mean they're not as able at their stage and age of life to really build those, you know, it might be just the difference of them. They can have coffee every week with that colleague and build that relationship. So it was about that, and that less is going to be more. So, I mean, a lot of this is very practical. I just looked at the average. I mean, I just read some stuff on the average work hours and looked at that, and I thought, oh man, we've got to make sure that church is efficient in that sense, that we really value people's time with that. Freeing them up to have a lazy barbecue on a Saturday with neighbours, rather than coming to the next, you know, church training day or something like that.
Yes, so, but that to me, as you share that, is driven from this underlying base of what you're trying to do with the church, like you are. As I did mention, if you look, which I have, on your website, that journeyyouc.com, you can see that everything is about that. So it's easier, I guess, to free people up and to make those decisions when that is what you're really driving at. It's not that easy for everyone, though, Andrew, to do that. You know, what are the challenges? Honestly, you work with other pastors. What are the challenges for pastors to make that? What stops them from going to that space?
Well, yeah, that's right. And I mean, to reflect on the journey, we were a very young church. We were only formed in 1987, which for mainstream churches, that's a very young church. And we were formed with a very high evangelistic output. I mean, there were 500 homes in Golden Grove, and they door knocked every one of them twice a year. And most of that was the pastor and the elders. I mean, they were amazing. So we could draw on that well really easily. It wasn't a hard sell to say, hey, our DNA started with, the story is a fantastic story, you know. Whereas I imagine there's people listening, and I've got colleagues, you know, who are in a church that, you know, is 50, 60, 70, 80, 100, 120 years old. Well, the original history is harder to dig up. It's a deeper well, and it might be laden over with a lot of things. So we don't always have that change. And also, most churches are, you know, particularly post-COVID, 70 to 90 people. Okay, so that's one pastor with some committed lay people. I don't like that term, but you know what I mean. And so what we're finding in our leadership coaching is that clear vision and a real Matthew 28 vision. Every vision statement and mission statement needs to be your particular version of that in your context. But then the kicker is not what we're necessarily going to start, but what are we going to stop? And so some of us are our own worst. Oh, no, I've sometimes been my worst enemy. You know, what am I doing in this meeting? What's this about? You know, sort of thing. So, or programs that were once evangelistic but have sort of flatlined a bit, or are sort of evangelistic. I mean, you know, a cake bake sale, sure, but is it in, you know, it's not exactly an alpha course, is it? You know, sort of thing. So I think that's the less is more, and to go, okay, I've got 50 hours a week that the church has asked me, what do I need to do personally to prioritise that? And that's a very hard decision when there's demands or historical demands on the role of that you've inherited at a church. But that's the game. You've got to be prayed up and go, I've got to be absolutely clear about this, to the point of, creating tension. Because, otherwise the natural inclination will be to drift.
Yeah, that's so true, so true. Let's talk about the broader impact on your community around your church that the church is having in the community, in the local area. How does that look for you?
Yeah, well, we're not a small church, but we're not a massive church either. Like, we would have probably about 400 or 500 people who'd call the church home, but each weekend it'd probably be about 300. So just to give an idea of that. Now, some listeners in a country area go, oh, that's massive. But the thing is, within 5 minutes of us is 100,000 people live. So we're in a high population area. So all that being said, there's historically and currently great churches in our area. So within 5 to 10 minutes, there's 55 churches in our area. Okay. Now, of all shapes and sizes. So it's not about being the best or the biggest. It's about being true to ourselves. So in terms of impact, honestly, some of it's immeasurable. Some of it's the stories. I go, okay, because on your darker days you go, are we having any impact? But the public impact for us would be the children and youth ministry. So we looked at our demographic and we went, so the average demographic in Mr. and Mrs. Tea Tree Gully City Council area of 100,000 people is they're about 40 to 42 years old. They've got a couple of kids, one in primary, one in secondary. They've got a reasonably chunky mortgage. They're probably working a household of 1.6, 7, 8 full-time. To full-time, most of the parents, often the mother is working more than she wants to, but they've got a mortgage, or they're putting their kids in a low to medium fee private school sort of thing. So that's our clientele. And so the first thing we looked at is, does our church reflect that? Because if our church, the average age was 55, semi-retired, well, we're out of sync. We've got a focus group, but we're out of sync with the general demographic of our area. Now, the reality is our demographic is probably 3 to 5 years younger than the average demographic in our area, which if I'm going to have a fault, I'd rather have that fault because we're leading up sort of thing. So the impact is a really vitalised youth program that we've got, because that's a felt need. So irrespective of the demographics, since 1991 in our area, 10% of our area will be high school age people. People move into our area just so their high school kids can go to the government or private schools because they're pretty good schools. So we have always focused on that, and to make sure that's a very evangelistic experience on Friday nights, but then the Friday night that leads into the Sunday experience. So it's no point having a youth group of 100 on Friday night if only 2 teenagers are involved with the church worship in a discipleship stream. So, but 70% of our young people in our church in youth ministry are from unchurched backgrounds, but the transfer to both Sunday morning and Sunday night is high. So that's great, and we've worked really hard at that. Kerry Newhoff said a really good sign is what your sort of your 10 a.m. service, the flagship service, how many 17, 18-year-olds you've got in the front 2 or 3 rows that are leaning in. And that wouldn't have always been the case, but now that is the case. Even though the Sunday night's sort of the, cooler service, but they love it. So that's a big impact thing. Now, that's not for everyone, but that's our demographic. When I look at the demographic, that's a major felt need for parents. They want, their kids got friendship issues at school. It gives them another space. If they've got family issues and the kid's struggling at school and isn't involved in sport, it's giving them another community that they can connect with, and that's what we're doing. So, and we're known now. So people ring up the local Tea Tree Gully Council and they go, oh, look, I'm worried about my youth. One of the first three things they'll recommend is Journey Church for their youth.
Amazing.
So that's one thing, you know. And now we've got to be more than that, because we realise we're not just a youth church. You know, there's a lot of single adults and that sort of thing. So we're trying to work on some of those things too. But a lot of our people are working. So, you know, it's having a worship and faith experience and a smaller group experience that's efficient enough to honour their time, but also focused enough so that they're going to be fed, but also be able to bring their family, bring their friends to that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think that, you know, for me, just listening to you, just the importance of each of us that are involved in churches really understanding the local area where we are placed and what the demographics are, and to be able to minister to those demographics, or to be able to dream, to spend that time with the Lord of how we can meet that, whether there's high migrants in the area, whether there's high students, university students, or whatever it is. So yeah, this has been really helpful. So we've been talking about particularly the church's journey to evangelism, but how that's looked for Journey Church in South Australia with Pastor Andrew Hogarth. So this has been a wonderful interview. I'm going to drop in our show notes all of the links so that you can stay connected to Journey Church and to Andrew, so that you can see what's going on there and have a look. But why don't you send us an email if you've got any further questions, and maybe we can help answer those for you. Or send us an email of how your church is doing things, and we can start to get that out and promote that also through our own social media and encourage people across our nation and beyond. So, Andrew, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, bless you, Tina. Thank you for all you're doing, and all the people listening. Bless you. You're absolute champions.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode from our Summer Hits series that runs throughout January. And get ready, because we've got some incredible new episodes lined up for 2025. I can't wait to share it all with you. Until then, take care.